we're going to get started as soon as we do the prayer. And I'm going to get with that. All right. As you know, our broadcast tonight is Thursday, September 26th, 2024 at 9 p.m. Eastern. We're going to deal with words are still powerful. Those who define them usually rule. And of course, they are the instruments of deception, very effective, whether oral or written. Here's my prayer for tonight to help me to do a better job. A prayer for understanding. Heavenly Father, help us to understand what is happening to us in the here and now as we are in this world but trying not to be of it. If it be your will, help us accept that we have always had problems communicating with each other, at least since way back during the days of the building of the ziggurat, the Tower of Babel. We accept that you scrambled the people's speech at that time because they were using it for wicked, self-idolatrous purposes. Some of us know, too, that the adversary is also interested in spreading confusion. Please give us wisdom enough, as our Savior cautioned us to develop, that we are not deceived or unnecessarily confused. Your word tells us that we see now as through a glass darkly, but that one day, if it be your will, some of us will see the truth clearly and know you, Heavenly Father, even as you have always known us. While we remain in this veil of tears, help us to understand what we need to understand in order to resist Satan and conform ourselves to your plan for our lives, and as we struggle to be part of your greater purposes. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay. I wanted to preface this too with a reference to a book by ex-attorney and Christian author Melvin Stamper, who wrote a book in 2008, which is already showing its age, I think, called Fruit from a Poisonous Tree. He's got some good stuff in there, particularly at the beginning, where he answers the question, where did it all go wrong? And some people want to know, when did it all go wrong? How long's it been wrong? What he said was this: I truly believe that many of the problems we have with government and the judiciary today, so-called judiciary, stem from the deliberate bastardization of the English language by those in government. Stamper concludes that without the use of proper English, tyranny will always be the end result. Unfortunately, in much of the rest of the book, Stamper abuses and misuses the English language himself to say things he doesn't mean. Although he recognizes none of the structures that he calls government are anything but private for-profit corporations, he treats them linguistically as if they were the bastions of the republic, which their predecessors had once falsely claimed that they were. Stamper was a veteran, and like many veterans and patriots, fails to address what that status means linguistically or factually. He clearly understands the corporate military's role in such atrocities as Tuskegee, MK Ultra, and many, many others. The gunning down of the bonus Army veterans from World War I. He's got a lot in the first part of his book in which he recognizes that, you know, military can actually just be a cover for mass murder, and we've dealt with that on previous broadcasts. Throughout the book, Stamper basically can't stop thinking like a lawyer. He recognizes the importance of rebutting the presumption that he's a citizen asset of the corporate United States, which is one of the status correction documents, so-called. I think there's a better way of describing it, but I don't know what it is. Anyway, so because you can't be a citizen of a corporation, United States being a corporation, it goes by many names and changes its names on a regular basis. The one that's currently up on Dun and Bradstreet is Government of the United States, and it with an address on Pennsylvania Avenue. Um, anyway, in Samper's book, he does he goes through an elaborate repudiation notice that he had delivered to um, the then Secretary of State of the United States Corporation, but he even though he knows it's necessary to do, he clearly feels like he's just suffered a self-inflicted amputation. He never thought, as a veteran, that he would have to do such a thing because when you use the language of patriotism, it pulls at your heartstrings, and even though it's not real, even though it's not real, words are powerful things. Um, to deal with what the problems are that I think are primary, and I've mentioned this before, and that is uh, our problems with freedom, the lack thereof, and also the fact we're more and more getting into losing control of our lives because we have allowed others to define us. In Executive Order 13132, Section 2D, signed by Bill Clinton, they admit a certain amount, um, but qualify it. The admission, and it's based on pressure from the corporate United Nations, or I don't know what. The people of the states are free. This is what it says. The people of the states are free, subject only to restrictions in the Constitution itself or in constitutionally authorized acts of Congress, okay, to define the moral, political, and legal character of their lives. So, but the devil's in the details. Subject only to restrictions in the Constitution itself. Wait a minute. Wasn't the Constitution supposed to give us rights? Of course, it doesn't. No. It repeats rights we already had from God. Um, and then it's got or in constitutionally authorized acts of Congress. Well, um, we're finding, of course, that acts of Congress, although they're supposed to be consistent with their Constitution, aren't. So there's all kinds of ways that the people have already lost their right to define the moral, political, or legal character of their lives. Um, so if you look at statute or executive orders or any of that nonsense, you know, you're not going to get anywhere useful. And that's why I keep coming back to what we started with, which was the assignment to us of dominion over God's creation in Genesis 1:26. Well, what does dominion mean? And I looked it up in various places. I suggest that people look in in Webster's 1828 dictionary, some of the older Black's Law dictionaries, somewhat. Remember, we're the people. We are the sovereigns of this country. We can define anything any way we want. So you can look there. You can look, but better look in the Bible. And there's really two kinds of dominion. Is a lot like sovereignty. dominion is defined as, and this is from the Bible, um, sovereign or supreme authority, the power or right of governing and controlling. The dominion of the Most High is an everlasting dominion. And that's from Daniel 4, verse 3. Whether earthly dominion such as we have, which is temporary and carries heavy responsibilities with it, people forget that. We didn't just get a gift in Genesis 1:26 of dominion, the power of dominion. With the power comes responsibilities. Whether it be our limited temporary dominion, or God's dominion, which is everlasting and vast, it's been defined as the power to direct, control, use, and dispose of at pleasure, the right of possession, and use without being accountable as the private dominion of individuals. This is from Webster's 1828. Leviticus defines dominion to be, you are therefore to keep all my statutes and all my ordinances and do them, so that the land which I am bringing you to live will not spew you out. That wasn't too much after Genesis 1:26, so I have to think that that's part of it. Anyway, then there's the story that's been told, the parable in Mark and Luke about the tenant farmer that refuses to pay what he had agreed to pay, and the anyway, so that was the failure to do that, the failure to live up to his responsibilities, and of course part of that too involved violence and the killing of the owner's servants and even the owner's son. I understand this is a parable for other things. The whole concept of sovereignty and dominion are kind of wrapped up together, it seems like. And they're also wrapped up together with the notion of government. What is government? And I would urge people, if you want to see a reference to the 1828 Webster's, go to our website, where it's one of the subpages is info links, and it's there, and so is the Geneva Bible, so is the King James Bible. Government is defined as control or restraint, the exercise of authority, direction, and restraint. It derives from the term, from part of the etymology of it is meant as in mental, the control of mind. So government involves mind control, at least etymologically speaking. All right. Am I missing any comments on the chat? You notice anything? Are you seeing the chat, Ron?
Yes, I'm actually reading. I was just looking at it just now.
Oh.
I think Rex had a question for you.
Oh, hi, Rex.
Hello,
Haven't talked with you in ages.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes. Thanks for coming on.
No problem. I reread Melvin Stamper's book yesterday, and something I noticed. I think I mentioned to you I was helping a friend with her long-term disability, and And one of the books that is written about that whole rigmarole basically says that what kind of law are you dealing with? And when I read Melvin Stamper's book yesterday, I saw it. And it's law that predates the country. It supersedes the constitutional protections. It's
Hmm.
all the above. It's the equitable admiralty jurisdiction under the law merchant. And the law merchant allows those entities, those commercial, the legal fictions of those corporations to bypass local policies and customs, such as constitutions and the protections of the people, as in due process protections. And that fits right in with what I've noticed with her situation. And I've noticed it with all situations. You know my history of the psychiatric, the psychiatric BS.
Yeah, yeah. You are advocating for somebody being
Yes,
terrorized by the psychiatric establishment and
yes,
psychiatric labeling. Yeah.
yeah. Labeling is what it is,
Hmm.
But that's, at the high level, I was trying to figure out exactly how things like this can exist. And when I reread, thank you for reminding me about the fruit from the poisonous tree, because I was reading through it and it's like, oh my gosh, that's what's happening. Is that when we were all, we're also so-called converted to legal persons and unjustly enriched by the corporations and governments for their purposes, not for our own purposes. And who truly benefits from that? Commerce. Commerce benefits from that. Where does commerce go back to? It goes back to the admiralty and equity, and then the law merchant.
Well, commerce is an abstract concept. There are probably people who are benefiting. Merchants.
True.
Yeah.
I'm talking about concepts. Concepts
Yeah.
that have, been around since the Roman Empire. The law merchant's been around that long. Even in England, the law merchant was not allowed to be in the common law courts of England or the statutory courts because of the heavy use of usury.
Yes.
Yeah, because it was unchristian. The usury is not Christian.
Right.
And that's the reason why that's the reason why they created the law merchant, is because they wanted to have their own jurisdiction, their own legal methodologies. And it's just that when you see,
But the law merchant itself is a spinoff of the law of covenants and contracts that the Bible refers to.
correct.
Yeah.
100% correct. Because if you read in Stamper's book, it goes back to, how the Social Security is essential. When we were basically moved into Social Security without our consent.
Yeah.
We became essentially the legal persons that they get to play with.
Did we become that, or we just agreed to pretend to be?
No, well, we presume.
We didn't know that there was a difference.
Yeah, we did not know. It's a presumption, and that's the thing. Is that Melvin Stamper talks about presumptions also.
Yeah.
And the heavy use of presumptions. As you know, if you go back to a lot of the stuff we've read over the years, presumptions supersede facts in a court, and in the fake courts.
In the fake tribunals.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, especially in long-term disability, it does not operate by the rules of civil procedure. It does not operate by the rules of evidence. It does not operate by the rules of equity. It does not operate by the rules of contracts. And
it's just administering an asset, really.
Yeah, correct. And even though the constructive trust is there, say long-term disability through an employer, the employer is the administrator of the constructive trust. The insurance company is the trustee, and the beneficiary is the person who happens to need the benefit of that constructive trust, long-term disability policy. And but thank you for reminding me of Fruit from the Poisonous Tree. Otherwise, I would not have read it last night. And because
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, because if you just search through, if you just go and search for Admiralty, just read those paragraphs where Admiralty is at in there. It gives you a concept of what's being applied to the people. And
Yeah, well, the whole thing about Admiralty to begin with, it was injected into their constitution, and it was a power grab.
right,
You know, the people weren't involved in that. I mean, other
correct,
than as
correct.
minions. So,
Yeah, and then that's where that was the importance of the legal person, is to pull us under a false presumption into that. So that's what I see going on everywhere. That's why if you read Melvin Stamper, all crimes are civil, and
mm,
essentially, and that's what it comes down to. Because
I don't know what that means. All crimes are civil. We were talking about
I've made
a
that
Roman civil
argument
law.
before.
Yeah.
well, all crimes are civil under Title 27 of the federal.
And what are we calling a crime as opposed to an offense? Because
Oh,
they don't really have crimes in their system. They have
true.
offenses.
Okay, offense. Yes, I'm sorry about my language. They're offenses because, like, even kidnapping, which is trafficking, human trafficking.
Oh, but trafficking has some other baggage that goes with it
Well,
to make it difficult to prove.
well, anytime you hear the word traffic, that means commerce.
Yeah,
And
yeah, everything that they do is for financial gain. They're corporations by definition.
well, yes,
If
yeah,
that
and
they're there for financial gain
right,
and non-existent individual liabilities. Don't
yes,
forget for
I
the
agree.
harm they do.
Yeah, and even with the United States Constitution, there's a presumption that there's the red herring fallacy that governments are sovereign. Governments
Uh,
governments are sovereign in relation to like the United States is sovereign in relation to England, but within the United States they're exercising sovereign authority delegated to them by the people in the limited subject matter jurisdictions.
I don't think that's even true anymore. I don't
Well,
think that.
not
Yeah.
anymore. But as a
Right.
concept, that's the way it was, because
Hmm.
they stopped recognizing the non-delegation doctrine. You know, what I cannot do in my own person, I cannot do through the through another. Basically, if you have someone you hire to make sandwiches for you,
Uh-huh.
and you make your own sandwiches, you never lose that sovereign authority to make sandwiches. You just delegated it to someone else. So
Right. And you can always take it back.
you can always relinquish, or you can relinquish
Yeah,
a delegation.
or withdraw it. Yeah.
Yes,
Withdraw the delegation. Uh-huh. Yeah.
yes. But
Yeah.
generally, if because what you were talking about is Melvin Stamper's book, especially in the light of what I was helping I'm helping my friend with. It gives you a broad concept of what, you don't have to read it line by line. Just search for Admiralty within the book. It shows up like 36 times. Just read the paragraphs that it shows up in.
And why are you focused on Admiralty? I mean, I see that it had been a traditional power of monarchs, and they wanted to keep that in the new republic, or what they were telling the people was a republic, which is another term we haven't really defined.
Agreed.
And that's why they needed the Constitution to grab that power of Admiralty that they wanted desperately to have, but they had
Yes.
to sweeten the deal by throwing in the Bill of Rights to
But
make it look like they were giving the people something in exchange for the power grab, when they weren't giving them anything.
Well, you also have to remember federalism. The way federalism was originally practiced up until the 17th Amendment is that the people within the states were governed by the common law and equity, when they're in business with entities, but within the states. The states,
The states were then considered sovereign nations at
right,
the beginning, or at least
right.
before the 1787 Constitution they were.
Well, the states delegated them their sovereign authority for interstate commerce and common defense. And then on top of that, the senators were elected by the states' legislatures. So the states, and it's very important that recognition be there, because what power does the Senate have that is really powerful? Treaties. And treaties are commercial in nature. The states want the commercial. The states want the benefit from treaties because they were commercial in nature. They wanted to protect and also benefit. And
But none of this stuff is actually true today, though.
no,
Because
but when you look at it from a lens of history of what has occurred, especially, we all know the Treaty of Peace was just a joke, and that
hmm
and
the Treaty of Paris that
yeah,
supposedly ended the so-called
yes.
Revolutionary War.
Yeah, all it did is say is like, you're going to be like one of us. You're going to have to abide by the same international rules as we do, which is that admiralty jurisdiction, the law merchant. And eventually, Alexander Hamilton, in his infinite wisdom as central banking and trying to utilize the implied powers clause, which doesn't really exist, pushed us further and further that way. So there's a lot to it, but to be able to wade the waters that we do today, we have to recognize what we're dealing with.
Well, I would suggest that rather than wading into the dark waters of their Constitution, their 1787 Constitution, that we look at what we had before that's never been repealed, the 1781 Constitution. Or before that, there wasn't anything at all. There was just the Declaration.
Well,
Why did we need a Constitution, really?
well, that was a commercial act to create the United States, to create quote unquote a sovereign nation in order to relate to other commercial activity.
But the Treaty of Paris established that a sovereign nation didn't come out of that.
Well, because they were operating under the British, the international unit of trade was the British pound. So
King George remained, the titular head of the American continent.
Right.
After the Treaty of Paris, and flexed his muscle a little bit, as we saw with the so-called War of 1812.
Correct.
And still to this day, but it's all corporate.
Yes.
That's why I think it's much more useful. I know you emphasize concepts rather than people, but I think that there isn't much left in the world we see as far as concepts, other than, I don't know, worshiping Mammon and screw your buddy before he screws you. Are those the concepts?
No, I don't believe that, because I'm a hate the sin, not the sinner type. So
I understand that, but the sinner has to repent at some point.
Yeah, and that's when either I put them down or I walk away. If I can't walk away, I have to deal with them anymore. Otherwise, I put them in their place, whether it be 6 feet underground or, flat on their back.
Well, I think that we have to go back to what the Bible told us to do with those who cause injury, harm, or loss to others. And there was plenty of instruction about that. And is Charles still on the call? He has talked extensively about hi Charles, about Exodus. And the system that was in place then and continued on for hundreds of years, as I understand it, afterwards. You want to talk a little bit about the Exodus 18 model of how to deal with wrongdoers, Charles?
Charles, before I have to go back to work, I'm sorry. I'm working right now. I just stepped into.
Okay. Well,
You know,
don't be a stranger, Joel.
I'll do my best. Thank you. God bless all. And Charles, I'll watch this later on YouTube. So make it good. God bless.
All right.
Thanks. All right.
Yeah, thank you for the kind introduction. I'm sorry Joel had to leave there, Catherine. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, that
Exodus 18.
yeah.
What did God tell us?
Well, that's a brief summary. That's where Moses was trying to do all the judicial process for everybody in the entire nation of Israel. And his father-in-law told him, "Look, you're running yourself ragged, and it's not good. The people need to learn how to do judicial process for themselves. And so you need to appoint captains over smaller communities of tens and fifties and hundreds and thousands. And in their littlest communities, they will judge the small cases that they can handle. And what they can't handle in the smallest communities, they'll pass up to the next level. And what they can't handle there, they'll pass up to the next level. And what they can't handle there, they'll pass up to the next level. And then finally, after all that, if they still can't handle it, they'll pass it on up to Moses." That was the whole summary of what Exodus 18 is all about, and that plugs into Revelation, talking about the 144,000, because it's a hierarchy based upon multiples of tens at that Exodus 18 lowest level, and then at the higher level, the 12 tribes of Israel, that's multiples of 12s, and so it's a hierarchy of structure wherein the sovereignty is at the grassroots of the people, because they control the general jurisdiction judicial power, like the Sixth Amendment says, and the Seventh Amendment implies. The trial of criminal cases will be in the localities, the local districts of the states, and criminal authority is the sovereign authority. That's one.
Now, that's the procedure. That's the procedure that they implemented after they got to the promised land, or even before. Was it even before?
Well, it probably existed before. Our biblical documentation is kind of scratchy, and even later history of common law and things are where it's a moving target. We've got pieces to try to put together the picture puzzle pieces, and sometimes we think we got the picture puzzle pieces lined up right, and then something new comes in, and we got to rearrange the whole picture. But we've got essential elements here, and when we look at the writings of people like William Blackstone in 1750 or so, he quoted that Exodus 18 portion of the Bible.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, directly quoted right out of his commentaries on the laws of England. It's in my documents.
Oh yeah, it's that's a classic. We're not bound by it, but it's a good guide. Always we have to keep in mind, we're the people. We have all the earthly sovereignty from God, and that's been acknowledged even by the corporate demons. That when we serve them with notices. But the Exodus 18, I like to think of it as a procedural structure, not only for administering justice, but also for administering defense, wasn't it? It was because it was comprised originally of fighting age men, right?
Yes, well, especially as it carries on into the common law tradition, because as Blackstone said in 1750, the laws of England are based on and a continuation of that Exodus 18 model. Okay, this is the Protestant Christian tradition before the Roman Empire came in at the Norman Conquest and started screwing everything up. So it continued on, and in pursuit of your direct point there, it is not only judicial, it's also executive enforcement. And that goes to the concept of peace officers and keeping the peace. And a town constable is a captain of 100 or 10 households and 10 armed men. and justice of the peace under common law, constables and justice of the peace. Justice of the peace is captain of 100 armed men and 100 households, and a county sheriff, reeve of the shire, he's the captain of 1,000 armed men. That's his posse comitatus. Okay, and thereunder we have not only the judicial power but the executive power in common law monarchs, but they're accountable to each other to build consensus. You were talking about prior to the Constitution, under the Articles of Confederation, that concept of confederation, that's an assembly of sovereigns. And if they don't want to be assembled anymore, they can cut and leave, like the South tried to do in 1760 or so, or 1860 or so. Guess what?
But there wasn't a motive to leave until they had the 1787 Constitution crammed down their throat and the beginnings of federalism.
Yeah, well, the original concept of federalism, like I think you mentioned, was based upon a confederation, wherein the sovereignty was with the local communities. That's the original definition of federalism. They changed the definition of federalism. You can see it in law books' definition of federalism.
That it meant confederalism?
I don't comprehend your question.
You're saying that the concept of federalism was not an effort to destroy the nation's status that the original 13 and subsequent states had.
True. Like I said, federalism was based on the concept of confederation. The terms were related.
I thought that originally that the 1781 Constitution was designed to be a mutual self-protective pact between the acknowledged sovereign nations that were called states to loosely ally themselves with one another. It seemed to me it would have worked pretty well.
For a while, until Alexander Hamilton and his high-level Freemason buddies got together. And
there you go.
Yeah.
There you go. That's a big part of how things went wrong. There's always going to be, power grabs. There's always going to be greed, particularly, when you deviate from the Almighty's plan. And of course, that the seeds of that destruction were already planted even as early as the Declaration, because the Declaration never really acknowledged the sovereignty of God. They talked about the grand architect of the universe, didn't they? Or something similar. They weren't talking about God.
Yeah, there were defects in the Declaration, no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
The original draft wanted to abolish slavery. And the South said, no, we're not having that.
Mm-hmm.
See, we can't actually have the right to stand under God against slavery. Slavery is divinely blessed. We got religious differences of opinion. And if we're going to fight the British, we got to just have our form of slavery, and we're just casting off the British form of slavery. That's what we want.
But how much of fighting the British by the colonists really happened, and how much of it were paid mercenaries like the Prussian troops, Hessian troops, I think it was.
The Hessians, I remember that.
Yeah.
Those the Hessians were the Germans.
Yeah. There was a lot of mercenaries involved.
That's how they incurred all that debt, wasn't it? Because the people themselves weren't interested in fighting King George, for the most part.
For the most part, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, high-level Freemasons had a big role in all of that. That whole Boston Tea Party.
Absolutely.
That was high-level.
Yes.
Yeah. They dressed up as Indians in the hopes that they could blame it on the Indians. But the cat got out of the bag. Everybody realized, well, it was a bunch of white men, and a lot of them were.
a bunch of prominent Bostonians were seen going into the lodge there in Boston,
It was so it was
coming
literally a
out as
false flag operation.
Yeah, yeah,
That's the
yeah.
way to think of it. It's a false flag. I think they were pretending to be someone else.
Hmm.
they've been doing false flags
That's an
since
old idea.
yeah, yeah, since the start of the nation. They've been doing false flags, and they're continuing them to this day.
Yes.
Yeah, they're using them to bamboozle the weak-minded among us and keep the vast majority of us in slavery. Um, so that's what we're stuck with. And the big question on my mind is, how do we break free from all of this?
I'm thinking that we need to start. We have to have our own system of justice, and I see that with common law courts. The only thing we haven't really addressed was, and we have on previous broadcasts, the procedure of it was Exodus 18. The substance of it, though, in a way, it was also procedural, was given to us by our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ in Matthew 18:15 through 17. The you can see it as a concept of due process, where you presume that the man or woman you're having a dispute with, and everything is a dispute between a man and a woman, or men and men, women and men, whatever. That this provides a means of establishing what the facts are. And then once you have the means of establishing the facts and a procedure for doing it, then you need an enforcement capability, which is where I think Exodus 18 model comes in again to provide that. But we have to start small, with the little assemblies of tens, maybe, and neighborhood patrols.
It's our present system of government is a compromise between the righteous, godly model based on Exodus 18 and peace officers, the sheriffs and the constables. That's all written in to our statutes and constitutions at the state and federal level. But civil Roman Empire model, top-down authoritarian government, is also in there. And that's what gets all the financing, and that's how the Freemasons and the Roman Catholics and the Pharisee Jews get all of their juice out of society, is squeezing us dry, is because that one side of that terms of engagement, rules of engagement document, if the people ever get their act together, we can force the Sixth Amendment and the Seventh Amendment, where we've got lots of jury trials. That's one of the points I think I don't hear you emphasizing quite as much as you might there, Sister Catherine, is the jury trials are based on consensus building.
I'm happy to provide jury trials for any respondent who requests them. So far, in our Ohio Circuit Court of Record, no one has asked for that, and there's no need to have a jury trial at all, or any kind of a trial, when they already admit the facts. Once the facts are established, there's no need for a trial.
Okay, when it comes time to start doing arrests and pointing guns at people, it's better to have a clear jury verdict justifying the fact that this person deserves to be arrested instead of just some paperwork that they defaulted?
Well, we always have the God-given right to self-defense if there's an immediate threat. We always have that. I don't know that we should be going out and committing acts of aggressive violence. I don't think.
See, you said correctly previously that words are very important.
That's right.
When we respond with a criminal prosecution that's successful, that we've proven our case, then we're not implementing aggressive violence. We're responding to the aggressive.
implementing a lawful court order, and we have begun to do that in our Ohio Circuit Court of Record. We have begun to we have determined that there's no need to go through the rigmarole of a grand jury inquiry when you have the 3-notice process establishing the facts. Once the facts are established and you let the people who are responding know that they are facing criminal sanctions, lockups, or worse, then you've got a judgment that you can enforce. And that enforcing a judgment, I don't think we're there yet. But that's different. Enforcing a lawful judgment than just up and doing something. And I think if you look at their Second Amendment, for example, and the use in the English language, I know in other countries they have one term for a firearm, for example, an arm. In Spanish, it's un arma de fuego. But there's a difference between an arm and a weapon, and the decision was made. I mean, we're not bound by this, but the decision was made, and I guess the people liked it, to talk about the right to bear arms, not the right to bear weapons. If you think of arms as being defensive and weapons being offensive, weapons could be used to impose capital punishment if the people believe that that's after due course of law and Bible law that's necessary, then so be it. We're not there yet. But and maybe these people don't have to be pushed to that point, but I think maybe they do. We'll see.
Yeah, there's a lot on the table there, Catherine. I'm sure.
But I think our common law courts can resolve a whole lot of it with only maybe just 10 people. I'd like to have 12, because then you have the repeating of the no fact examined by a panel of 12 can be re-examined in any other forum.
Yeah, Seventh Amendment, right.
Yeah.
Again, it's a compromise. It's not just their constitution. Those high-level Freemasons, some of them were good. Most of them were bad, but some of them were good. And they hammered out their own consensus about, okay, well, we got to lock down an authoritarian model of government. And the good Freemasons said, well, wait a second, we got to have some provisions in here that guarantee the rights of the people if the people ever learn how to self-govern. Okay, we'll agree to it. But the people are probably going to be so stupid that they will never learn how to self-govern. Okay, well, we'll just write it in here and we'll just make the agreement. And then we're going to go ahead and fund the evil empire and establish our tyrannical form of government. But maybe the people will sometime get their act together and dismantle the whole thing and set up their own government. And that was kind of how the whole thing came together. And so we've got some real powerful tools within that Constitution Terms of Agreement 1787 document.
I agree that we can use what they have admitted to in the Constitution without accepting their Constitution as restricting us in any way, or being a source of power grabs for them. I'm not interested in letting them have admiralty power or any of the powers that they use the Constitution to as a pretext to grab. They had to give us something in exchange for the grab. And
but
why?
You know what neutralizes that entire admiralty jurisdiction is the Seventh Amendment and the jury trial process, because the wording says no fact tried by a jury shall be re-examined other than according to the rules of the common
Yeah,
law.
yeah, yeah.
So that means the admiralty jurisdiction can examine the issues before the court. That once
No,
we do,
it doesn't mean that. It just means that they admitted that they're not going to re-examine any fact previously examined by an assembly of 12. That's all that does. We don't have to accept. We don't have to accept every bit of their constitution to use bits and pieces of it that are useful. We don't have to buy the whole thing.
well,
We're the people.
I wasn't advocating that we buy the whole thing. It's a document that established Roman Empire civil, municipal, statutory government, and that's opposed to common law inherently. I detest that whole civil government structure, and I believe.
And we're not bound by it. You're familiar with Lysander Spooner's writings on the Constitution.
Right. But again, yeah, Spooner's essay on trial by jury, that's what broke me in back when I was 29. Okay, 87 or so.
Well, he also said we're not bound by that Constitution.
Yeah, he did a couple of really great documents, no doubt. Spooner was a genius, but when
you might want to revisit Spooner. I've read it through, read his treatise about 4 or 5 times. I get something new out of it every time. Every time I see something else.
I'm ready to do the revolution for people with eyes to see and ears to hear. We can do a nonviolent revolution right now, in my humble opinion.
I don't think a revolution implies that we want to overthrow some existing system, that we want to, if there are people who like to be enslaved, I don't want to fight the enslavers as well as the enslaved. Let them be enslaved.
I'm not suggesting that. You're mischaracterizing my proposition, sister.
I would like to see us evolve in a more grassroots manner, using the lessons of the past, of course.
A grassroots revolution, that's not an oxymoron. We can do it from the grassroots bottom up. In fact, that's exactly what I advocate.
Yeah. So, that means, if we're not safe in our neighborhoods, if we're not safe to travel down the road, we're not going to be in a position to do much else. If they're, stealing our children, locking us up in psych facilities, we can't do much else. We've got to deal with the people who are doing that to us as people and subject to, we could get Bill Gates, if he harms somebody in Ohio, we can address that. We can address it. And we might only have an empty judgment for a while, but it's better to have that judgment, empty and unenforced though it be, than not have it at all. Because one day, people will pull their heads out of their butts and they will start enforcing. And I want to have something to enforce before I want to reverse engineer this back to having, a lawful judgment. And they can laugh all they want. Oh, it's not enforceable. It's not this, it's not that. But we have it. We have findings of fact. And, and it's biblical. Anyway,
I guess what you're saying is the judgment is there when the enforcement mechanism arrives, as it will at some point.
Well,
we'll build it, they will come.
Can I build on that a little bit?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, most states have statutes that recognize the common law principle of citizens' arrest. Okay?
Yeah.
Citizens can use deadly force to execute arrests when necessary, and when they've seen a felony committed in their immediate presence or anything like that. Okay, so we've already got the enforcement tools at our fingertips.
Not really, because there's a gotcha in there. The gotcha is, but you have to scurry. you're scurry over to the nearest private corporate code enforcer.
No,
Otherwise,
no,
that's how their statutes read now.
no,
That's
you
the
don't.
only way you have the right to citizen arrest
No,
under the existing system.
no,
That's how their statutes read.
no. You've been
Well,
civilized.
no, I agree. That's a
Civilized.
bad idea. We don't need it. We don't need it.
I love you like a sister. You do a lot of great work, but you don't really comprehend how common law has been brought in to our constitutions and statutes, sister.
I'm not concerned about the statutes, their statutes, which
know
are
you're
corporate
not.
policy.
That's where you're missing a big part of the picture, because when you see how common law is in those statutes and constitutions, then you realize we've got more
I know
tools.
they are. I know. You don't have to lecture me about that. I know that they are.
Well, then how come you're having problems with this enforcement issue?
I don't want to enforce corporate policies because they have common law nestled in there somewhere. Let's just freaking use the common law that we can use the ideas behind any kind of law if it's godly to do so. But to use it as they are with the gotchas that they contain, no, thank you. And I want to mention some of the gotchas first, and they've been undermining what could have possibly been a livable system for well over 100 years. Doctrines that they use, one of them is the police power. Y'all aware of that? They use that in their fake corporate tribunals to justify almost anything, including it's the power to regulate behavior that they claim. Police power to regulate behavior and enforce anything they want for the betterment of the health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the inhabitants. So, and they build that into their statutes and codes. Not interested in that, but they're growing it. They're growing it. It gets more and more toxic with every time a black robed wonder writes an opinion, because that's where it was birthed to begin with. It was in one of the corporate opinions. It's related to. It didn't come into use until the 1880s. After it was, but it was not in common use. John Marshall, Chief Justice of their U.S. Supreme Court, in an 1827 decision, Brown versus Maryland, snuck it in. He snuck it in, and then even then there was the Dartmouth College versus Woodward. Little by little by little by little, that's how Satan works. Little by little, they take a little bit. Nobody's paying attention. Let's take a little bit more. A few years later, and there you go.
Creep. That's
right.
What we call that, the incremental creep.
Right.
I think that's how we go from having a government that or having government models that are basically put in place to help us make roads and infrastructure, and then next thing you know, they're taking your kids off of you. there was kind of a process for that to happen, because I don't think anybody wanted to form government with that in mind. Hey, I want to give these people the power to take my kids off of me if they don't think I'm doing the right thing with them. So that's something we've been dealing with for a long time. There's a name for it, the incremental creep. We go from
or the frogs in the boiling water. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Just turn the heat up slow.
Right.
We've been dealing with that for a long time. I mean, that's almost kind of a problem inherent in any government, as they always seem to want it. Always seem to have that tendency.
Well, and they use words to sneak it in. They've been using police power for quite some time, and it was supposed to be palatable because it would be delegated, even though it was introduced by the federal people. Uh, it was said, "Oh, we'll let the states exercise the police power. It's an inherent part of sovereignty." What sovereignty? Well, that was back in the day. People didn't question that. All right, so then they moved on, but they wanted to grab the kids. So then later on, it wasn't really until 1944 and the decision of Prince versus Massachusetts, 321 U.S. 158. They have a related concept, same kind of a deal. You know, we'll do what we want to for your own good. They call this one Parens Patriae, Parens,
Mhm.
Patriae, Patrae, and that was it sounded like a good idea, sort of. Well, we're going to protect children from being worked in factories, and we're going to make sure that they go to school, our schools, of
Oh,
course,
have personal
and
experience with that. Well, I'm sorry, Catherine. I'll let you continue. I just said that I have personal experience. Well, we want to make sure your children are attending school the way they should be.
oh, right, right.
Yeah, like I said, I've got my own long experience with that. But I'm sorry. You can go ahead and continue. I didn't mean
Yeah,
to
I'm not
interrupt you.
sure just when it started to be applied to the public schooling, but a lot of this happened after Lincoln's grabbing of, um, you know, uh, this top-down, tyranny thing in around the time of the Civil War. All right, so parents patriae, that was applied to protect children against being used by their parents to distribute religious literature. Uh, Nobody liked the Jehovah's Witnesses. It was the Watchtower literature that was being handed out. Oh, that was abusive. You see, that was abusive. And so, the cabal had to protect those children because they had long since abandoned the idea that parents were the primary protectors of children. Um, and then there was another concept, but that was used for all kinds of things that were done to children under parents patriae, and it was just it. It's a concept because they said it was a concept, and they didn't want to use police power because police power maybe was starting to get a bad name. Who are these people to regulate our um, safety, health, and morals? You know, um, there's another concept. There were a lot of spin-offs on parents patriae as well as, and continue to be same with police power. There was another doctrine that they've been working on since the 19th century, maybe even the 18th century, and that's the doctrine of necessity. Necessity. Sounds good. Whose necessity might that be? I remember getting introduced to the concept of necessity. Um, it's the concept of the lesser of two evils, um, just to get us used to that. I remember hearing in law school there was a case. People were shipwrecked, and they had to make a decision about. This was the Queen versus Dudley and Stevens. It was from the UK. Group of seamen were lost at sea for an extended period of time without anything to eat, resulting in the group killing and eating one of the members on board. The group was stranded at sea during a storm with no food except for 2 1-pound tins of turnips after approximately 2 weeks of being stranded with no signs of rescue. 2 weeks! 2 weeks and they're already killing and eating each other?
Oh, Catherine, I'll tell you what, I'll make this commitment to you. If we're ever on an island somewhere, and I won't be trying to eat in 2 weeks. I mean, the primary, you're more concerned. I mean, if you have any common sense, or you know, if you're in that type of scenario, the first thing you need to look at is water, which I'm sure they had access to. Human beings won't starve to death for months, so I don't know. Maybe I think there maybe people had some Latin cannibalism going there. They just wanted to get out of their system. No, I mean it's I gotta be a lot hungrier than that before I'm gonna eat another human being.
Yeah, no kidding.
That's just
Uh,
no, that's wild to me. I never heard that story before, but I got to thinking, geez, Al, who's looking at you like a porterhouse steak in 2 weeks? Yeah.
well, of course, and there was that poem written around that time, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Water, water everywhere, but not a drop to drink,
Not a
because
drop
they
to
may
drink.
have
I
had,
remember hearing that as a child. I
yeah,
remember hearing that.
yes, me too. Yeah, why did they made a point to have us learn that. Um, so they focused on the helpless victim, who supposedly had no family. After killing and eating the boy, rescue eventually came and the seamen were tried for his murder. At trial, the defendants asserted the doctrine of necessity. It was necessary to kill the boy in order to ensure the rest of the group's survival. But the court rejected the argument and found the prisoners put to death a weak and unoffending boy upon the chance of preserving their own lives, um, uh, with the certainty of depriving him of any possible chance of survival. Um, but they used that, even though it was unsuccessful. And I learned in another case where an actual human being was trying to use the doctrine of necessity. It was a man named Green, and he was, I think he was a minor drug offender. He was locked up in a penitentiary. He was young, not real muscular, and he was preyed upon naturally. And he was subjected to daily, if not multi-daily, multi-times a day rapes. Uh, he reported this, attempted to get protection. Of course, he was laughed at by the administration, and subsequently fled. At his trial for the crime of escape. Yeah, it's a crime to escape from torture. Now, this was sometime in the 20th century. His attorney asserted the defense of necessity, and the corporate tribunal said, nah, he could have put up with more. Yeah, it wasn't like he was threatened with death. Yeah, yeah. I think it's Green versus State. Uh, but after those cases sold the idea of necessity to the people a little bit, lesser of two evils. Heck, we see that every time there's one of their corporate elections. They use the doctrine for themselves, which is who it was for to begin with. The doctrine of necessity. Public policy. They mean corporate policy, private corporate policy. The essential premise is that the law, I mean corporate policy, ought to promote the achievement of higher values at the expense of lesser values, and sometimes the greater good for society will be accomplished by violating the literal language of the criminal law. So the role of necessity as a defense was to encourage those who are faced with untenable options to choose the one likely to cause the least amount of harm. Except it never seems to work out that way for actual people. But it certainly works that way for the people operating private for profit corporations masquerading as government. Works just really swell for them. So when you see these concepts, and they didn't just go away, after that, after the cannibalism case, Parents Patriot didn't just go away after the Jehovah's Witness case, and police power is thriving in their system. So just be aware that if you look at what these definitions are and where they came from, who created these definitions anyway? They don't come from the Bible. They're nowhere in the Bible. I'm sorry, were you going to say something else? Either one of you, Ron or Charles?
Oh, you know what? Here's something. Here's a memory that you dredged up when we were talking about this. Years ago, my chiropractor was doing some kind of research project for us. She was going to college for something, and she found a paper written by a doctor. And the doctor, this is going to be the craziest thing you ever heard, was actually promoting the idea of preparing small children, like ways to cook them to where they. The one doctor said a small child fricasseed is almost indistinguishable from something composed of pork. I remember reading that, and I got to think when all these things you were talking about a moment ago. I mean, God help those people if they had somebody in a medical establishment backing them up with something written like that. You know what I'm saying? You know.
He was promoting it as a healthful food.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. They said they were having problems sourcing food at the time, and there was a problem with excess population. He's like, hey, we can solve two problems at the same time. We can start eating children. Because
I think Jonathan Swift came up with that too.
I remember reading that in total disbelief that someone in the medical profession could have come up with something like that. Because I don't think you have to be an expert in medicine to know there are problems associated with cannibalism anyway. I mean, there are diseases
that's true,
like prion and kuru and
there's
a number of things, but here's the thing. I remember thinking about that a moment ago when you were talking about this other court case. That good God, what if they'd had something bad like that? Well, hey, a doctor signed off on this. This is perfectly fine.
Never thinking about the morality of doing it to begin with.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. The doctor apparently never considered that either. Hey, maybe these children have the right to not be fricasseed. I don't know. But I don't know. It's funny that popped in my head when you were talking about that court case.
Well, and then I think of the cannibalism of children goes back to biblical times too, and was horribly condemned by the Almighty.
But there were people doing it.
Yes, there were, and they were sacrificing to Moloch. Yeah.
I read something interesting about that a couple of days ago. I have to share that with you when we have more time. But yeah, I mean, someone actually brought that up. That they had the big bronze statues of Moloch that they'd toss their children into. A nice big fire built.
I don't know if I could pull it up now, but not so long ago, saw an article with photographs from Chicago from the 1930s, where people in Chicago were worshiping Moloch. Large number
That
of people.
I wouldn't be. That wouldn't shock me at all. I would. Nothing about that surprises me. I
Right,
mean, I
right.
think on some level people are still doing it. Maybe they're a little bit
Well,
more
yeah,
secretive
they're
about it.
doing it
Hmm.
big time. They're doing it big time now. We're all aware, are we not, of the adrenochrome child torture facilities,
Hmm.
adrenochrome extraction and child torture facilities.
I can't think of the name of the movie, but I honestly think Hollywood's actually gotten to the point where they're bragging about this now. Is they're putting it in movies.
South
That's
Park,
in
but
them.
South Park makes jokes about it.
Well, it's not just sound. I mean, I'm talking about a movie that came out too long ago, and God, I can't think of the name of the movie for the life of me. But the central character of the movie was a prison inmate. He was possessed by a demon, and he was basically talking about how abortion, the fetuses are incinerated once they're extracted, and he said basically it's just a more refined method of what they were doing back in the days of Molech worship. It's funny, the actor portraying it was explaining this to an attorney. And I thought, well, okay, this is Hollywood just kind of throwing this in our faces, I guess. Hey, look, things haven't really changed. We've just refined our methods.
Well, Hollywood is just a vehicle for predictive programming, for to
And
get
I,
yeah.
well, in Hollywood, you have the esoteric and the exoteric. And that's an example of something
Yeah,
they
why don't you
convey to
explain
us
that to
through the
people? I'm not real
esoteric.
clear
Well,
on that.
yeah, exoteric is anything on the surface. In other words, just blatantly making something obvious obvious. Esoteric is, when you're introducing a concept subtly, which I think they were
Hmm.
attempting to do in that movie. In other words, we're saying it, but we're not. We're just kind of blending it into the background. We're not really overtly throwing it in your face. That's kind of been part of Hollywood for a long time. This esoteric versus exoteric, subtle versus obvious in their messaging.
Yes, yes. Um,
You,
yeah,
you
well,
know what's funny
and it
that
can be confirmed. It can be confirmed. You can look up
sure.
some various adrenochrome extraction corporations that are
Well,
doing business on Dun
there's a
and
verse in the
Bradstreet.
Bible. There's a verse in I can't, and it's escaping me right now. I can't think of it. But God commanded our enemies to reveal their plan to us. So they're trying to comply, but they don't want to make it. They don't want to make it too easy. So that's where the esoteric comes in. Where we're going to tell them our
Oh, okay.
plan,
Yeah, if
but
you can
we're.
find that, that would be
I would,
that would
yeah.
be awesome.
I remember a friend of mine telling me about that years ago. But that's part of that's in the Bible somewhere. Our Creator,
I'd heard of that, but not that it was from the Bible. Yeah.
you will reveal your plan to them. That's what
Uh
God told
huh.
them. You
Uh
are
huh.
going to reveal your plan. Well, okay, we'll reveal it, but we don't want to make it too easy. We gotta make them dig a little bit.
Uh huh. Uh huh.
That's kind of their response to it. Let's do it esoterically. And we can't just tell them, our plan is to do this, wipe them all out, and turn them into cyborgs or whatever you know the current plan is, Agenda 2030 and all their other
Right.
insanity.
Right. Right.
Um, but yeah, I like I said, I just remember someone telling me about that years ago. They're
I
actually
yeah.
they're bound to reveal the plan.
I heard that, but I didn't know it came from the Bible,
Hmm.
and I didn't know where. Certainly, it
I'll
came
tell you what.
from.
I'll dig into that and look for it. I'll share it with you when I
Yeah.
find it.
There's another term that I just ran across, and it's related to taxation. Um, the term tax means a pecuniary burden laid upon individuals or property to support a sovereign. Keep in mind, taxation is a power that only belongs to the sovereign, and we're allowing
Right.
private for profit corporations to exert it. Um, then there's a related term that's probably, I don't know if it's older, about the same vintage. The term tribute certainly goes back to biblical times, means payments made by a defeated people or by slaves to a conquering power. Tribute. And then that seems to be related to the term tribulation, which itself, here's the interesting derivation of that. It derives from the Roman word tribulum, tribulum, which was a flail, meaning a tool used to separate the wheat from the chaff. Isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I've made reference to tribute a good bit because that's, like I said, that's what taxation is. It's an acknowledgement of being conquered by the conquered. That's something you pay to government as acknowledgement. Yep, you got me. I'm yours. Because income taxation, I mean, all forms of taxation are immoral, but I think income taxation is the most immoral of all of them. Because look at what has to be done to maintain it. We gotta keep track of you. You're in our inventory. You know. I mean, the only really moral form of tax, I don't even know if it's moral, would be consumption-based taxation. In other words, sales tax or something of that nature, but even that's questionable.
Well, the source of it, or the source of the power should be a sovereign power, and they aren't sovereign. That's Marion versus Apache Indian tribe case.
Can I jump in a little bit?
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. In common law England, prior to the Norman conquest, as based upon Exodus 18 model, the captain of that 10 household unit was called the tithing man. Okay.
The tithing man. Okay.
And see, at that point, there was no separation of church and state, and it was voluntary economic donations, tithing donations.
That's right.
The 10 household unit was also called a tithing group. Okay.
A tithing what?
A tithing group.
Okay.
Okay.
But the tithes were for maintaining worship of God, weren't they? Wasn't that what?
Well, it was both. It was all together. It was all under the Exodus 18 model, where everything was decentralized as much as reasonably possible down to those 10 household communities, including taxation. Only it wasn't taxation. That word taxation, as you guys are correctly pointing out, it's coercive, it's manipulative, it's bullying, it's threats of violence.
It's extortion.
Yeah,
and it's unauthorized because it comes from a non-sovereign. Tithing, on the other hand, comes from the sovereign, ultimately.
Well,
the ultimate sovereign.
Yeah, it's service to God. It's donations to God's kingdom on this earth.
Right, right. That's the difference. That's a huge difference.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm glad you guys comprehend that. That's great.
What do you make of tribulation being a means of separating the wheat from the chaff? Is that what we're experiencing now?
Well, kind of. But a lot of people in that camp like to think that God is behind the tribulation, and I don't think that's the case. I think it's like Job, where God is allowing the devil to implement the tribulation. God isn't the one bringing forth this tribulation. Like the people who support false Israel there over in the modern day state of Israel, so-called.
Christian Zionism.
Yeah. They think that, this is all part of God's plan. God wants those Israelis over there doing all those bloody, violent things against the Palestinians, because then Jesus is going to come on a cloud and save us all. That's part of Bible prophecy. I'm sorry. They're standing their head on their head in their use of logic and reason and spiritual common sense to arrive at that convoluted interpretation of God's will.
And then they bring up that, basically there's this theory that, oh, God promised them, they were His chosen people. He promised them, uh, they would always be His chosen people. Well, and that was His holy covenant and would be forever. But in any kind of contract, there's always the option, and God has expressed that when the other party to the covenant keeps crapping all over it and breaching it, that discharges the obligation of the party of the second part.
Well, exactly. And that's why
Yes.
that sovereign authority over the so-called nation of Israel now, it should be with the Christians. The sovereignty went to Jesus Christ, Messiah Yeshua.
Right.
He was the Messiah of
Amen.
Israel. Okay? So
Mhm.
they got no claim to be pretending like they are the legitimate nation of Israel or that they're legitimate Jews. Look at Revelation
No.
2:9. They're synagogue of Satan Jews. They're not real Jews.
There are those who are Jews who say they're Jews but are not.
Right
Yeah.
on. Right on.
Yep. That's it seems like, as the bloodshed mounts, that people might be starting to vacate that Christian Zionism perspective. I'm seeing a little. I don't know. Maybe I'm looking for it and I see it. I don't know.
Well, some of the people that have some common sense are kind of discovering a little bit higher level of consciousness there. But conversely, on the other side of the yin-yang dynamic spiral, the evil empire is propagating the weak-minded, hurting them into mass mob confusion. And so it's kind of about the separating the wheat from the chaff really is happening. And all of the people that aren't doing their homework, they don't love truth and justice and God, they are being manipulated off into the threshing floor, the pit of hell. Because if they're not doing their homework and they're not smart enough to at least listen to other people that have done their homework, then they're on the wrong pathway and they're going to suffer a negative judgment, in my humble opinion.
Yes, I agree.
Thank you.
But that brought up something that I'm kind of losing my focus on what that was. Yeah, well, okay, we can talk about the term. I think, if nothing else, and I know Frank's going to want to check in on us in the next few minutes and wind up the broadcast. But I wanted to mention, if you're stumped as to what a word means, and in the English language, we use few words for many concepts. Other languages, I mean, I understand, like the Eskimos have 50 terms for snow. We don't do that. The use of the term state. What the heck are people talking about when they talk about state? And does it matter if the first letter is capitalized? Does it matter if all the letters are capitalized? I mean, I think I've got kind of a handle on it. State of Ohio, all caps, is clearly a private for-profit corporation dedicated to generating revenue from the crimes of its agents and claiming, not correctly, but claiming that they have their people, their agents, have no individual liability. Of course they do. Just doing my job is not a defense. But the other term that state can be used as is to refer to the people of the original republic. That can be a state. And then we probably mentioned it before, but I wanted to talk again about For those who don't understand, a republic means government by consent, and you probably noticed that the Mockingbird media doesn't like the term republic. Their constitution, even, never uses the term democracy anywhere in it. He used the term republic because the people at that time understood that a republic meant government by consent. And that means consent of everybody against whom that government is acting. A democracy is mob rule by the majority. Democracy brought us the executions of Jesus Christ and Socrates.
I don't think so.
You don't think so, huh?
I think the etymology of the term merely means decentralization of power down to the grassroots of the people. Demos means decentralized. Ocracy means rule. That means the rulership is decentralized.
Well, but it's still, 51% can
You
vote
got it,
to
Catherine. You're saying what I was going to say.
Well.
can take away the rights and the property of the 49%.
You see, that's a specific interpretation that's negative. There's no inherent. I dare suggest we should back up on this important issue and look at the fact that there's evil schemes, conspirators in positions of power that are dividing and conquering the common people, and they divide them into left wing and right wing, Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah,
Okay?
I agree.
Okay, well, see, and my dad was a union man, and he was a Democrat, and I've bought into that in the past. I realize it's all screwed up in a lot of ways, but there's a lot of good people that consider democracy a good thing. And technically speaking, the word can be used in a good manner that doesn't mean 51%. When you poll the jury, you got to have 100%. Okay, that's a democratic process. That's people from the grassroots up. Okay, so we can use the word democracy.
It's also a consensual process.
Huh?
It's also a consensual process.
Yeah, based on consent of the governed. Mm-hmm. And so we can use that term democracy in a manner that does not alienate half of the American people. Okay, that might be to our advantage to quit pissing off half of the American people.
I don't want to start dumbing down our vocabulary and revert to inaccurate terminology, and then we'll be back to a Tower of Babel situation.
There's nothing about the word democracy that takes us towards the Tower of Babel.
Well, I don't want. I think it's got too many negative connotations. I think that there's a reason that the Mockingbird media uses that over and over and over and over.
Right.
And it's nothing good.
You're part of the conspiracy to get right wingers to hate the left wingers. Okay, and vice versa. We're being played against each other, and we're buying into it.
People who identify as left or right are already lost.
Well, then how come you're taking the right wing side?
I'll tell you what. I agree with him to the degree it seems like we're in a scenario right now where basically what's happening, we've got two established political cults at war with each other right now. That's kind of what I see what's happening. So it's what I call, I've always called the false left-right dichotomy.
Yes.
He's right in the sense that there's a false dichotomy being used right now, but that's basically to pit half of the American people against each other. If we're in a state of conflict, we're not looking at what they're doing. I mean, that's how a small enemy beats a large group of people. They infiltrate and divide that group of people up.
Yeah,
I get what he's saying there.
Thank you, Ron.
I was gonna say, I might have a couple issues with what, but I'm trying to say I see where he's coming from with that. We need to get away from the false dichotomy, because really what's happening is this small group of people has targeted all of us, and that was one of their methods, was to divide us. Um,
Well, I'm not so sure that God is looking for unity or the salvation of America. I think he's more interested in
oh,
separating
I
the
don't
wheat from the
disagree with
tares.
that at all either. Yeah, there's the parable of the tares. We're seeing
Mhm.
the tares
Mhm.
emerge right now.
Yes.
And I think if we remember right, we're there's those are slated to be cut down and cast on the fire. If I remember right, if you've read the parable of the tares.
Yes. Yes. So anyway, I think people are going to have to Christians are going to have to choose um, God to worship God or worship country. I don't think it can be necessarily both ways.
You can't have two masters. Ben
That's right.
Franklin. Man cannot
Right.
serve two masters.
Right. Okay. Well, on that note, and there's probably plenty more we could say about it, and maybe we will on the next broadcast. I guess we'll stick with the next broadcast will be post election, and that'll be on the second Thursday night of November, whatever date that is. I don't know what it is. Same time. And I thank you all for the lively discussion and the
Okay.
attendance. It's really been great. It's been very difficult to run this broadcast just kind of talking to a wall most of the time. So thank you all, and we'll be back next month, second Thursday of the month, and let's stay in touch. Between now and then, y'all can reach me at anybody, WLJA Radio at AOL.com or 614-633-0215. And I'd be happy to talk to anybody who wants to be free and honorable. Okay, thanks again, and good night. Till
Yeah.
next
Yeah.
time.
Good night, everyone. Hey, it was a pleasure. Take care.